Let's dive right into a major economic puzzle. The Chinese government is making a big push, urging its citizens to spend more to really get the economy humming. But here's the thing. It's just not working. Despite all the official talk, there's this huge gap between the goal and what's actually happening on the ground.
So what's really going on here? Why isn't this massive consumer engine firing up? It's not like the government isn't trying. Well, the answer, it turns out, isn't so simple. It comes down to a few really powerful, deep-seated forces that are basically holding everything back. Let's break them down.
To really get what's happening, we've got to look at four big structural hurdles. First, the undeniable pull of demographics. Second, how that's tied directly to the housing market. Third, some pretty powerful cultural habits around saving. And finally, just a reality check on how long these kinds of economic shifts really take.
All right, let's tackle the first two, because they're really two sides of the same coin: demographics and housing. And to see what China is up against, we don't have to look far. The story of its neighbor, Japan, is, well, it's a powerful case study.
Just take a look at this. For decades, private consumption in Japan was just flat, stuck, hovering right around 55% of its economy. What's really telling is that this stagnation lines up almost perfectly with the moment its population growth turned negative. It suggests there's a kind of natural ceiling on how much an aging country can spend.
And this demographic picture leads to a very simple but incredibly powerful rule. Property markets follow population. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Fewer people, especially fewer young families looking for a place to live, means way less demand for new homes.
And you can see the fallout right here. After that infamous bubble in the 1980s, Japan's property prices didn't just crash, they just flatlined. They entered this long, drawn-out period of stagnation. This is demographic gravity in action, and it's the exact same force that's starting to pull on China's housing market right now.
Okay, let's move on to the next major hurdle. This one goes beyond pure economics and gets into something much deeper, a cultural anchor that really prioritizes saving money over spending it.
And if we look at China's own recent history, the trend is frankly staggering. Private consumption as a piece of the economic pie hasn't just dipped, it's been falling for more than 50 years. Let that sink in. This isn't a new problem. It's a massive long-term trend that has been building for generations.
You know, there's a key term for this: secular decline. And all that really means is we're not talking about the normal ups and downs of an economic cycle. This is something different. It's a deep, persistent, multi-decade pattern. And you can't just fix it with a quick stimulus package.
So the big question is why? Why has this been happening? It really boils down to these deep-rooted cultural preferences for saving. Without a really strong social safety net for things like healthcare or retirement, what do? You save. You save for a rainy day. You hoard wealth because you feel like you have to. And that money gets tucked away, sometimes into assets like gold, instead of being spent in helping the economy grow.
All right, that brings us to our last hurdle, and it's really just a reality check. It's about time. And to get a sense of the timeline we might be talking about for building a consumer economy, it's actually super helpful to look at, believe it or not, the United States.
Now, this might surprise you, but even the world's biggest consumer powerhouse wasn't built overnight. The U.S. was actually stuck in its own low-consumption rut for 2 whole decades, right through the 60s and 70s, before spending really took off as a share of the economy in the 1980s.
Let's just put that number up on the screen to let it really hit home. 20+ years. That's how long it took for the American consumer engine to really get going again after its own slump. It's a powerful reminder that turning an economy into one driven by consumption is a generational project, not something that happens in a single 5-year plan.
So, when you put it all together, the demographic gravity, the housing link, the cultural anchor of saving, and this very long timeline for change, what's the final verdict on China's consumption challenge?
The central conflict really boils down to this. On one side, you have the government's push, all the slogans calling for more household spending. But on the other, you have the hard economic reality, a set of structural forces that mean any real change is going to be measured in decades, not in short-term policy cycles. This leads to a pretty unavoidable takeaway. Slogans just aren't going to cut it. The only real path to a consumption-led economy is through deep, difficult, long-term structural reform. We're talking about building a real social safety net that gives people the confidence to spend rather than save.
And that leaves us with one final critical question. If rebalancing the economy towards consumption is a project for the next generation, not the next quarter, what's going to power China's massive economy in the meantime? That is the challenge facing policymakers today. Thanks for watching The Explainer.